Welcome everyone in these dark hours for Ukraine on this conversation with Yaroslav Hrytsak. I expect some people will still want to enter, so to say. So I'm starting a bit like explaining what we want to do in this hour, who I am, so to say, and especially very welcome, of course, of you in these very, very difficult moments, not only for Ukraine, but especially for Ukraine, but I think for all us freedom-loving Democrats in the world, I would say, especially also for Europe, because this is a defining moment which we haven't experienced since 1945, I suppose. So my name is Ruud Meij. I'm a philosopher. I'm living in Alkmaar, a city in the north of the Netherlands, north of Amsterdam, near the sea, North Sea. I'm together with my colleague and friend Frans Gerards visiting Ukraine already from, I think, 2007, a yearly visit, and our business, so to say, is working on anti-corruption and integrity of government in Ukraine and supporting democratic development and all these kind of things. So from that background, I'm considering Ukraine more or less my second homeland, so to say, and especially Lviv, my second home city, where we visited, where we worked a lot. I was in Ukraine every year, 4 or 5 times, so to say, till COVID came. That made it much more difficult. So I think I might say that we experienced and were partly a small part of this remarkable history of the Ukrainians, of the resilience of the Ukrainians, of the freedom loving of the Ukrainians, of the democracy loving of the Ukrainians, and so on. And so this is a bit my background. A couple of weeks ago, I started thinking about then these clouds are already gathering in Europe and in the world, and Putin was making his points and became even more, by the day, more threatening, and we still didn't quite expect that would happen, what happened today. And then I think, okay, I have to do something. So I have to do something, and I think, okay, one thing I can do is to build a bridge between Ukraine, friends for me of Ukraine, people who are considered important in Ukraine, to the Netherlands, and well, we are basically on the internet to the rest of the world, and arrange some conversations, weekly conversations, to reflect on and to think on what's happening on the ground in Ukraine. And so as we started this, so I'm a bit excited about it, even a bit nervous, so to say. So I have to think about all these technicalities I have to take care of and so on. But I'm very happy that we are here now with all of you attending this conversation. And most happy I am that Yaroslav Hrytsak, a good friend of mine from Lviv, was happy and prepared to share his thoughts in this hour with us all, so to say. And for my idea is to repeat this weekly on the Thursday evening, this kind of talks and reflection. And of course, the circumstances changed immensely in a couple of days, so to say. So this is what's kind of very different situation than when I came up with the idea. And so I'm not quite sure what will happen with this plan the next weeks or so on. But as I said, I'm very happy and honored that we have Yaroslav Hrytsak here as our guest for this hour. So what are we going to do? So we have a conversation, I think, about 3 topics, but we will see what come up. The first is, I'm very curious, of course, and we are very curious what's actually now happening in Ukraine, how people experience what's happening in Ukraine, in Lviv, but other places. So I asked Yaroslav to share his thought with it, and we will discuss that with him. And the second part is a bit, well, Yaroslav is an historian, leading intellectual in Ukraine. So, well, we would like also hear something from his more political and let's say historical perspective. What you will share what your thoughts about this, and second, the last part of our conversation will be what can we do, especially what can we do here from the Netherlands and other parts of the world. Of course, our governments are acting, but I think this is also time for us as citizens to act, so to say, in the name of support for you in Ukraine, and in the name of freedom, democracy, and peace in the world. So that's a bit long introduction, I would say. So Yaroslav, very welcome here. Glad to have you here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, Ruth. I'm very honored to be with you under this. I'm sorry to say, tragic occasion.
Yeah, you could say so, tragic location. So could you please, a lot of people know you, but could you say something about who is Yaroslav Hrytsak?
Do you want me to tell that?
Well, you might keep the sequence for yourself.
So I'm old enough to spend half of my life in the independent Ukraine, half of my life in the Soviet Union. So you could calculate it easily. I'm 62. So I'm a historian. And I basically focus on history of Ukraine, modern history of Ukraine, but in larger context. I've been teaching in various places, both in Ukraine and outside Ukraine. I was teaching in Harvard, Columbia, at the Central University in Budapest. I published several books, and probably one of the most, the most important book was published a few months ago. It's a global history of Ukraine. Probably this will do. Also, I'm kind of public intellectual because I contribute a lot to various journals, magazines. I participate in public discussion, all the kind of things.
Yes.
So this basically, this is more or less what I want to say about me.
Yes, global history of Ukraine. What you wrote a global history of Ukraine. Global.
Oh, you could write global history about anything. So why not to write about Ukraine? But basically, the story is that you couldn't really grasp where Ukraine from and the kind of particularities of Ukraine and the character of Ukrainian identities if you focus or limit yourself to Ukraine only, or even to Ukraine, Russia, because you need a larger context, and the global context fits perfectly.
It's especially today, of course.
Yeah, without a doubt.
So, can you tell us something about what's happening? What's happening now in Ukraine today? Well, I would say the nightmare after a bad dream when I woke this morning, and I haven't. Of course, Ukraine hasn't been out of my mind the whole day. But so, can you tell us something? What's happening? What's happening in the streets?
So there is a short story and long story. The short story that people here are not panicking, and situation they're worried, they're anxious, but situation here are relatively stable. I'm talking from Lviv. Lviv is just probably one of the most western city, very close to the Poland, by definition, by the European Union, and this kind of opposite side where the war is going on. War goes on the east and the south. We are on the far west. There are lines on the street, lines to the banks, to the superstores, to the apothecary, the kind of things. But people react, say, very calmly, with some kind of dignity. I call my friend in this, all the time from Kyiv, from Kyiv, from the capital, also from the east, particularly from Kharkiv and Odessa, which is probably now the most vulnerable places there on the mass attack. And they say that probably the same story applies to their places as well, with the only difference that we now have a bombing of Kharkiv and people hiding themselves in the shelters. This is very serious. At least by the noon, the station was very stable and people were behaving very, 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 say, with kind of dignity. We don't know what happened, so to say, But as far as I know, Ukraine control most of the territory. Some places has been taken, some places has been retaken, and this night could be crucial. This weekend, but particularly this night. So we'll know what will happen. What really happened, the kind of threatenings was rather dangerous. That the Russians managed to conquer airport very close to the capital. So, and also Chernobyl. But let's wait and see. Let's wait and see, because the thing is that Putin thought that there is Ukrainian army is not strong enough, all the kind of things. But what you see is the resistance is very strong. There is a strong resilience among Ukrainians, and most important, there's resilience among the society. Let me tell you that a few examples that we have this kind of fund, which is called Return Home Safely or Alive. So this day, there has been a record established. The society gathered money more than throughout the last 8 years. There is a points that we collect bloods for the army, for the wounded, and medicians, doctors keep calling people that don't come, stop coming because we have enough. There is lines on the street, so to say. So there is very strong mobilization, so to say. So mobilization, solidarity. People feel themselves, so to say, threatened, but also they reveal any kind of solidarity they can. We expect probably tomorrow, starting from tomorrow, a first wave of refugees, and probably also wounded soldiers from the front, because we are rather safe. And this will be kind of humanitarian crisis. So this is the more important thing, how we will deal with that. And this sense, we have to discuss, because we really need the high humanitarian help in this sense. But so far, we are situation under control. I have to say also that Ukrainian president and the Ukrainian government also acts very adequately. We didn't expect that, to tell you the truth, because they are not professionals. Actually, they are president of the former comic we had a famous comic club. They behave very adequately, I would say. So now let's see and keep our fingers crossed.
And if you,
this is a short story.
Yeah,
this is a short story, but a long story. If I may say, long story. So this is something which is not surprising for us, because these plans, this is what I see. But this you will check me by the end when I finish my answer. We know about this plan starting from 2009. This plan has been accepted right after the Russian aggression against Georgia. The Kremlin, the strategy toward Ukraine was elaborated and accepted by the Christmas of 2009. It leaked to the mass media, and there are some articles at that time written, but at that time it looked so fantastic that nobody could believe it. But when the Euromaidan started, by the end of Maidan, we knew that there's no fantastic anymore. This is the only real plan, and we expected the aggression of Russia in 2014, right after the end of the Olympic Games in Sochi. So the plan was very simple. So Putin is afraid of losing Ukraine, because there's a new generation has been born in Ukraine, which doesn't remember a Soviet Union. It doesn't have strong affiliation or sympathy to Russia, and they very much oriented toward West. So Putin felt that his time is running out, and therefore this plan was that if Ukraine make any move, whatever, toward West, either NATO or even European Union in long perspective, it should be punished. What will be punishment? So the military aggression, which has three aims. First is to separate the south and east of Ukraine, largely Russian speaking, from Ukraine, and this is Project Novorossiya, New Russia. And this is practically half of Ukraine. Then limit Ukraine itself to the small state in the center, which will be kind of vassal-like, with somebody in power who will be much more loyal to Putin, to Kremlin. And the rest of Ukraine, which is western part, may go whatever it wants, because Putin doesn't really want it, because they see they're not fit for the Russian project. So basically, the whole project was divided Ukraine in three parts, reducing Ukraine to a very small state in the center. And this is what we see right now, because basically there are two targets. Targets is the east and south of Ukraine, which means that Ukraine will be isolated from the Black Sea shore totally.
Mhm.
And this is this is the first. And the second is to attack Kyiv and replace the government and put somebody who will be much more loyal toward Putin. And this is exactly what we see right now.
Yeah. So you see this coming in from the Crimea, coming in from
Yeah.
Belarus, yeah.
Well, from Ukraine, but also reported from Moldova, from Transnistria.
Transnistria. Yeah.
So actually, we believed, wrongly so, in 2014, that after this so-called Russian Spring has collapsed, this plan collapsed, that Putin quit this plan. But now we see we were too naive. He kept this plan to the last minute.
Yeah. So I spoke to some people today, friends of mine in Lviv, and basically two things. What I took my attention. First of all, there was this, of course, very understandable, this feeling of panic, being anxious for your children, for your parents, for instance, so to say. And the other was the story that people are basically in a queue for shops where they sell weapons, so to say.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry to tell that this is kind of funny story. I met my friend, businessman, who was staying in the long line. They were buying weapons, and the line was very long, and they're very cheerful.
Yeah,
they want to go to the front, which also tells something. For sure, many people leave Ukraine. They're willing to leave Ukraine, especially from Kyiv. But still, you will see this kind of the solidarity activity. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's what you said. So make me also remember a bit of so what I experienced being at Maidan, for instance, this resilience, because this whole thing is of course very different from Maidan. But what I remembered from Maidan is this determination, this solidarity, and this I would say this determination that we will succeed, in the sense, in toppling Yanukovych, so to say. This was there, and so on. And is there something that you can say? Well, the same determination is maybe too early to say, but is something you experience today, also in Lviv, or?
Yeah, very much so. This very much reminds the feeling we have on the Maidan. Mm-hmm. Those who are on Maidan, they resembles this. They remember this feeling very much, and we see it again amongst the people here. At least here, but I believe the key is the same, more or less the same.
Yeah, I can understand that. So this is indeed. I think so. Ukraine has changed a lot in that sense since 1991, 2004, 2014.
What was the major change? Is emergence of viable, resilient civil society. Civil society is there. It's very much there.
Yeah. This. What do you think if we make change? But I don't know if you have to add something to your story. You made a kind of let's say a military wrap up, so to say, what's happening. On the other hand, what's happening in the street? How are people thinking? Is that something that you think? Oh well, this is something important we should share, so to say.
I don't really have to say anything, because it's probably too early or probably too late nowadays, because days already passed. I believe what is the most important thing, that Putin was very much relying on the blitzkrieg. Mm-hmm. That he could occupy Ukraine throughout the first hours. It didn't happen. No. It didn't happen. So therefore, I'm saying that this night could be very much crucial.
Yes, and this next coming days, because that is what we know about blitzkrieg. So yeah. So that's about for my idea. So. We talked about this before. If there was one thing what you can compare it with what is happening today, that it's probably the invasion of Poland in 1939, so to say. So
without doubt, and basically the strange thing that the rhetoric is the same, because in the 39, Stalin and Molotov, his prime minister of foreign affairs, was calling that Polish state was not existent, non-entity, failed state. As it could be legitimate reason to annex, to occupy the state. Now the Putin has the same rhetoric, the same argument, that Ukraine is failed state. like Stalin did to Stalin taught about power policy. So similarity is very strong. Also, trying to there's another similarity here from the Hitler side, because the Poland was divided by Hitler and Stalin, and they were sharing, they were conjuring some kind of the reasons for occupation. Famous Gleiwitz, you probably know the story. And the same was done on the Russian side. The only reason was that this was done so simple, so simplistic, that most in our times of the mass media, IT, the kind of thing, that all this kind of defuscation was very strongly and rapidly revealed, but didn't hinder them to use as kind of the motivation for military action against Ukraine.
Do you already see something like, so what you developed in Ukraine, I think after 2014, is a very vivid civil society, so to say. Yeah? So civil society organizations who basically did very important stuff on improving government and so on. So I can imagine, so this after this attack last night, so like myself, I woke up and like, so, oh boy, this is deep shit, so to say. But before you come to your senses and say, well, okay, well, we have to do something, do you see something already happening in your society? You already said something about it, that these citizens are coming together and think, what should we do, so to say?
You're talking about yourself or ourselves?
Yourselves. I will talk about ourselves also a bit, but yourselves.
No, this is what I'm saying, that people are collecting money, people are collecting blood, people collecting all the kind of things to provide it as a kind of, whoever is able joins the military forces. 3 of my PhD students already went to front. They volunteered, which means young people, that 3 of them there. Those just last 3, there's many of them. Those who are not, they're trying to organize some kind of the support in various forms. As I say, the kind of collecting the kind of things. We know what happened next because we're still waiting for this development. But what is most important, we have a kind of, how should I say, the control rooms or control or staff, which are emerging from below. People try to coordinate their actions. Mm-hmm. They are not just kind of the anarchic or unsystematic. It's very much a systematic, so to say. So people, this is you could see this kind of, again, we lost this feeling from the 2014 because we forget about it, but now it's coming back. Self-organization, very strong self-organization.
Yeah. So I remember this for 2014 that our former honorary consul, Bogdan Pankiewicz, he told me, well, and that's what was happening in the Crimea and in the Donbass. And he said, well, when it comes, when Putin comes, we send our kids and our women to Poland, and we are going to fight. This was basically, they were already practicing in the woods and shooting, so to say.
Yeah, but most important, the difference in contrast with the 2014, we are now aware that we have to pay a high price for it.
Yes, that's
most unfortunately.
Yeah,
this is what we realize.
Yeah. So if you could make it, it's difficult and be some sort impertinent to make a step back, so to say. Yeah? But you're also an historian, and you're studying Ukraine as the development of Ukraine. You wrote your global history of Ukraine. You studying Ukraine in the sense that as becoming a nation and becoming an independent nation and so on. And how do you see it from that perspective? So what's happening today in Ukraine?
So if I may, if I try my best to do the long story short. But if I try to make it short, I believe that Ukraine, since the First World War, found itself in the most vulnerable geopolitical borderland. And this is a strategically important borderland because what happened in there had very much strong impact on Eastern Europe and Central Europe and all Europe at large. There has been a book written by a British historian on the First World War, Dominic Levin. And it starts with a sentence that more than anything else, the fate of the First World War depended on what was going in Ukraine and about Ukraine. Which probably sounds strange, but when you're a historian, you see it. So basically, between 1914 and 1945, Ukraine was the Ukrainian question was the crucial question for emerging of a new Europe so to say. And if I just give you some probably short facts, that between 1914 and 1945, for the 30 years, more or less, every second male and every second female in Ukraine perished, died of a violent death. You could find such a casualties in other periods in other countries, like Germany during the 30 wars of the 17th century, when Germany also lost the third part of their population. But still, it's very, very high. I'll just give you some example that throughout 12 years only, Ukraine suffered several waves of genocides, which is the Holodomor genocide, the killing of the Soviet, the killing of the Ukrainian peasants, then Holocaust, then deportation of Crimean Tatars, then the mutual extinction on Poles and Ukrainians in the western part of Ukraine. There's deportation of Ukrainian from Poland, all the kind of things. So what I'm saying here, and also the extermination of the prisoners of war, Soviet prisoners of war. So what I'm saying here, in 12 years, you have 5 to 6 waves of genocide. So you can guess an intensity of the violence in this region. So there's a belief that we already passed. This is already a story which is the past, but that we don't see so. So to make the short story long, I believe that Ukraine could be compared to Palestine. Palestine is also a relatively small part of the world where the local conflicts has a strong impact on the global geopolitics. And now we see this is returning to Ukraine. Ukraine is Palestine of Eastern Europe, probably in Europe. And now we see the history is returning, so to say, most unfortunately. But basically, pattern is there. And I believe, and this is not just me, but many people, including Harari, the famous historian, just wrote recently an essay, that future of the world depends on what is going in Ukraine nowadays, for a variety of reasons.
One of the difference with Palestine, so to say, is of course that Ukraine become, let's say, has always been a name since 1921 as an independent nation, but become a sovereign and independent nation since 1991, so to say. So,
yeah, but there is difference, and there is similarity, because very much like Arab countries that do not recognize existence of Israel as a separate state, to the same extent, Russia doesn't recognize, or Kremlin, as to say, doesn't recognize Ukraine as a separate state.
Mm-hmm.
Putin believes, strongly so, that first, Ukraine doesn't exist. It's an artificial creation. Secondly, more importantly, he believes that there's no Ukrainians, as a matter of fact. That those who call themselves Ukrainians as a part of Russian people. And therefore, he believes, and strongly so, that he is not fighting against Ukraine. He believes he's fighting against West under Ukrainian territory. This is how we perceive the situation.
But and the difference is that you can't say Ukraine isn't, let's say, recognized as an independent and sovereign nation. So basically, apart from Putin, I suppose the rest of the world does recognize Ukraine as an independent nation.
This is very much different. We are lucky, relatively lucky, because we never had this kind of support in our history for lands. And this is for the first time when West come to our support. And this is very important historical fact, because I believe mostly, not exclusively, but to a significant, large part, Ukrainian failed because it lacked the support from the West. Now it's a different story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I remember when we came to Ukraine, so that was more or less with the same story. So when in 2007, so when we, France and I, Governance and Integrity, came to Ukraine, then Ukrainians asked us, so why do you come to Ukraine anyway? So to say, there are so much countries in the world with what you say that are basically could have some benefit in terms of anti-corruption and integrity. And then our story was all the time, well, in the end, and the story changed and isn't changed, but the context changed immensely in the last, let's say, 15 years. Where Ukraine goes, Russia goes, so to say. So it was also always my impression that Ukraine, simply by being there after 1991 and choosing, especially after 2013, well, we want to be a European, we go to a European way, a democratic way, and so on. That simply by being there, Ukraine is simply a threat to Russia, so to say.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right in the same things. It's not just about Ukraine. It's about the future pattern. What will be the pattern for the future world? So to say, authoritarian regime like China or like Russia, or Ukraine and West, which will have a based on democracy and the free market. So basically, it's about the pattern.
Yeah. It's also been, it's like this idea of the nation. So becoming an independent nation, so to say, is I think that's what always experienced in Ukraine. So immensely important as an asset for what you actually are doing and what you are being. I remember very well the story of Maidan when Maidan just started, and it was in December 2013. I went to Maidan in Kiev, so to say, and then I returned to Lviv again. I start from Lviv in the evening, and well, Maidan knocked me from my feet, basically. That was one thing. But then I came to in the evening at the central station in Lviv, and then you had this kind of shift change. So there was one girl who also came from Kiev, and then was in the city hall in the central station, and a boy was leaving for Kiev, and they were standing, the two of them standing in the city in the central station, and with the Ukrainian flag, and they begin to sing the Ukrainian anthem, the two of them. And it still gives me the chicken skin. I'm thinking about that. And everybody joined in there. And then I realized this idea of being democratic, being liberal, being European, but also being Ukrainian, so was so immensely important and an asset for the development of Ukraine, and also today, I suppose.
You're absolutely right. I have nothing to add to that. We have this experience throughout most of our life in the last 10 or 15 years, so to say, practically every day.
Yeah. I'm just also looking a bit to our chats, so to say, and I don't see any questions for you yet, but I want to invite our audience, if you like, please add some questions for Yaroslav. So I will look I'm much more multitasking these days, but I look at the questions and I will discuss them, so to say. Yeah. So this is what's happening today, but that's of course a bit premature, so to say. But my experience, not my experience, but my sense is that this is really a defining moment of the world. This could be it's maybe not the world, but especially for Europe, so to say. I think that what's happening, and I see it with our government, so to say, they're a bit like they didn't really expect it in this sense. What's now happening in Ukraine, and how do you see that? I see this as an existential moment for European history. So what we experienced, like a piece of 70 years of, so it's now been shattered, so to say.
So I'm sorry to tell that, but this is what historians know, that in history of the world, in the world history, war is a norm. Peace is rather exception. War is natural. Peace is very natural.
Oh, we discussed that before. War is natural. I remember. Oh.
So this is exercise. So we have to fight for peace because it's very fragile. And we forgot about it. We forgot it because there was 80 years without a war, and we expected this may last forever. This was more or less the feeling of people before the First World War. There's probably 100 years since the Napoleon, there was no war, and nobody believed the economic situation was that good, and there was a lot of technological progress. So this war will look like an impossible scenario. They were wrong. And we see these people are wrong again, because war is there all the time. Evil is all the time, and we have to be extremely aware. Mm-hmm. And this is exactly what Ukraine shows, this kind of example. So you have to be very, very sensitive, extremely sensitive, because peace is very fragile. We have to fight for peace. This must be, and this is what we know already in Ukraine. Secondly, I do believe, and this is very much related to this issue, that in the form like now, Europe exists right now, not Europe, but European Union, it's not quite sustainable. it goes through the crisis. And now we have this kind of utmost expression of this crisis related to the Putin, Ukraine, all the kind of things. And in a sense, people, it may sound very kind of paradoxical. I welcome this crisis because I believe that there is no way for emergence of new identity, new Europe, new construct of Europe without a crisis. Crisis is extremely important. So there's actually, I'm saying, it's not about Ukraine only. It's extremely important how Europe would react to this crisis and whether it use as opportunity to transform itself, so to say. Because I'm not to tell you, but you know it much better. But we experience on many occasions this kind of how to say the comfort of Europe, and I don't even have to say this kind of, but we know what I'm saying, so to say. But basically, the story, and this is what history tells us. You cannot leave your weaker neighbor, because otherwise it will fight back. It reach you one way or another, so to say.
I have a question from our audience. I would like to know, asks Victor, I would like to know if there are comments coming from people in Russia towards Ukraine.
There are some. There are several Russian outlets which are still independent, and there is a Novaya Gazeta newspaper, whose editor has recently been awarded Nobel Prize, and there's a Russian Moscow Radio Echo, and you could read the text. There are many of them. And there's most noble people who say journalists, historians, publicists. But recent survey says, sir, that proportion between those who support Putin and who are against the war is not very fortunate. It's 85 to 15%. The tragedy is that overwhelming majority of Russians, they don't like the war, they fear the law, but they support Putin. So basically,
I think that there was a kind of demonstration in.
Yeah, very much so. We see you could easily follow that in Moscow, St. Petersburg, in Perm, in other cities. But this is still not that much to change. This was expression that there are some honest Russians.
But it's not really it is no game changer, so to say.
Yeah. So let me just tell you that you may remember that what we have as Maidan also started in Russia in 2012. Bolotnaya Square, the large protest. And I just read recently paper written by one of the leader, Ryzhkov, of this Russian liberal. And it says that at that time, Putin was willing to concede because he felt some kind of force, power. The only reason the only language that Putin understands is a force. So basically, there has been 250 people coming to the streets in Moscow. And there'll be 500,000 of that Putin probably would resign. So this is the main difference and the tragic difference between Russia and Ukraine, between Moscow and Kyiv. In Kyiv, we could easily have 1 million several times. In Russia, in Moscow, they could even get 500,000. And this such a detailed change all the world, the whole global history.
Okay, and well, another question that I think that it could be important, so to say, is that there are large differences in present situation in South and East Ukraine compared to West Ukraine. So is that something which you could be elaborate on today? Because this was a story coming the last 20 years. So
yes and no. We know this kind of story, like the Huntington story, Clash of Civilizations, which used the Ukraine as a classical case of divided country, West versus East, all the kind of things. This is only one of the story. Basically, first of all, the line is very much moving. It's not stable, flexible. And now it's for the last 20 years, it moved very much toward the east. And nowadays, mass dividing line between Donetsk and neighboring regions. This is first things. Secondly, yes, there is regionalism in Ukraine. It's very much related to Russian language as well. But there are much more important difference nowadays in Ukraine. This is generational differences. Because between the younger people and the older people. If you look on the map who supported Maidan in 2014, you will see this generational change, the difference. This is kind of very important. Most of young people throughout all of Ukraine supported Maidan. So what I'm saying here, this is one-to-one results of independence. You have the first generation that has been raised under circumstances of independence. They feel very much differently. And third dimension is nowadays, since we're talking about young people, which is most likely middle class, and they very much generated in the large cities where they'll have a large universities, IT companies, all the kind of things. So there's a third division nowadays in Ukraine. This is between large cities and the other Ukraine. So what I'm saying here, if you follow this kind of lines, without a doubt, there is a difference between East and West. There's not to deny, but it's not as strong as it used to be, first of all. And secondly, you have to be very careful in this sense of what regions you may mean or what city to mean. Because one of the most important city which fight very resiliently against Putin is Dnipropetrovsk, which is industrial heart of Ukraine, which is totally Russian speaking. But still, they're now in the front of resistance against Putin. So I'm saying here, let's not be that simplistic, because Ukraine has been transformed very much for the last 20, 30 years. Yeah,
I agree with that. And another question for Mira, I didn't know that the plan on annexing Ukraine is in existence since 2009. And she asked if you will elaborate on that. How does this plan fit with the Russian people? Is it supported? So that's basically asking.
They didn't know about this plan, as a matter of fact, because Russian side is very much misinformed. And if you look nowadays in the Russian mass media, they still believe that they're saving Ukraine from the fascists, from the Nazis. This is not the war, their understanding. This is they're clearing Ukraine from the Western fascist government, so to say. But so I'm saying Kremlin and Russia is not probably the same things in this sense. And without a doubt, Russia is very much manipulated in this sense, mostly because of the mass media under state control, strict state control, even internet, all the kind of outlets are there's also strict control. But having said that, I'm not saying that Russia is not supporting Putin. Even more so, there has been a very good article written 15 years ago by Richard Pipes, who is probably the most famous historian of Russia from Harvard. And he wrote an article, What Russians Really Want. And he showed on the basis of the surveys that actually Russians wanted somebody exactly like Putin, somebody with strong hands who will come and bring order to society. So it's not that Putin just manipulated Russia. It's just many Russians, not majority, wanted somebody to have like Ukraine. So like Putin. So what I'm saying here, it's not a recent story. It's a story that goes at least for the last 15 years.
Okay, let's go to our last part, so to say, about what can we do. So in the sense that I had some discussions today, and I know a lot of going on also in the Ukrainian diaspora here in the Netherlands and so on. And so one of the questions is, what would be a sensible day, what in your opinion, to act, so to say, to do in terms of solidarity and support for Ukraine in this today? So to be honest, for a couple of days, I talked to my wife a week ago. I said, well, I buy a gun and I go to Lviv, so to say. That's of course very stupid for me to do. So luckily she said, don't do that. But it gives me a kind of the urge that, and I see a lot of people also, Ukrainians from the diaspora here, are basically walking around. One of your famous football players living in the Netherlands has said something. I'm running to and fro in my room, and I'm feeling helpless. I don't know what to do. So maybe we need a kind of focus, but maybe share us your thoughts about that. What you need.
So first of all, let me thank you for what you already did and what you will do, because we appreciate this very much. Any support any support is very important for us. I'm not pathetic. I'm just saying we need very much this kind of support, and thank you for that. Secondly, try to find, to your best of your capabilities, reliable sources of information. This is very important to have a reliable source of information and spread it further among your friends, colleagues, mass media, whatever you can. I believe you you could do much more than just spread information about the French, because you're politicians, philosophers, all the kind of things. You're public intellectuals. You have to be public intellectual, that's the same, because they have some responsibility. So try to share some reliable information about Ukraine. Do your best. And basically try to share positive information. There's a lot of positive things about Ukraine, not saying that Ukraine is a corrupted state, all kind of things, like Trump saying, by the way, Russia is much more corrupted than Ukraine if you judge by the index of transparency. So this is not exactly Ukraine who's failed state, it's Russia who's failed state. But basically, this is it. This is simple. And then the most important thing, now I'm going into the increasing importance, humanitarian aid. This is extremely important. We will face humanitarian crisis in the next days. So do whatever you can. Spread the information of the Ukrainian banks. You could send your money, which will go to the case. Medicine stuff. Whatever you could do, weapons, I don't know if this is probably government you can do, but still anything that could deal, such simple things as alliance, they also needed to be in Ukraine. Clothes, all the kind of thing, because we have a refugees crisis without a doubt. Yeah, this is something could do. This is very much human. This is very much human. And then more important things. I believe we have to hear some positive, that's more the positive, but emotional, strategic words, messages from you, from Netherlands, for European Union thing, which means very simple. Put pressure on your government that they would announce, at least in a very long perspective, the European integration of Ukraine. Open the door for this integration, because we will know better what we're fighting for. Because we have this kind of impression that we left the Russian shore, but we are somewhere in between, and we're losing European shore. Like, we're not getting closer any longer, so say. So stop.
Can you a bit elaborate on this Ukrainian integration? So we had not a very good experience with that, and so I was very much part of this bizarre Ukraine referendum in the Netherlands. You know probably about that in 2016. And
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to remember this kind of referendum. I believe it was more than tragedy. It was, I'm sorry, it says stupidity, extreme stupidity in the sense. I'm sorry to tell that. No, but what I'm saying here, that now we have a war. Whether we win or lose, we hope that we will win the war. But you can stop that. You could not stop that war in Ukraine only. It will come to your house as well. In one way or another, you will feel the results of this war. So sooner you will try to stop there, the better will be for both you and me, both you and us. So basically, I'm sorry, probably I'm sometimes pathetic in this sense. The only way for Ukraine to resist and to feel safe is feel itself as a member of a large community. Ukraine has no chances to stand Russia because it's much more smaller, have little resources, all the kind of things. But once Ukraine is the West, or West is back in Ukraine, Putin has no chance. Yeah. So if you want to say, to liquidate this kind of vulnerability of geopolitical space, Ukraine should be in. So this is something. It's not just about kind of the economical reforms, which is also important, but geopolitical stability, about the returning to the post-war settlement, the kind of fragile war. No more war, so to say. So this is what is the stake. So I'm saying here, this how you should put the pressure on the government to provide with some long-term perspective of chances for Ukraine to join the European Union. We are we are realists. We are realists. We don't believe that we will be able to join it in, say, in 5-10 years, but just give us perspective, because this symbol matters, and this symbolism would reinforce us, so to say. This is something very important.
Yeah, I understand.
And I believe nowadays the window of change is to start to tell it on the voice, because I won't go any further.
Yeah. But that also means that we have to reconsider something of ourselves, so to say.
Without doubt. So what I'm saying here, this is historically important. In many cases, in many examples, the new things are coming not from the core, but from periphery. We are now periphery. We are now very important for periphery. So we want to leave this space of periphery and to come to the core, because we hope very much that we could change, affect the core as well. So we say, I'm not going to too much to that, but basically I'm saying, be very much now entangled.
Yeah. And
let's since we are much entangled, let's accept it by the granting this kind of long-term perspective of Ukraine into the European Union and NATO. This is something I believe crucially important for us on symbolic stage. And the last but not the least, I believe that Ukraine deserves some kind of Marshall Plan. This already has been discussed at the European Maidan. There was an appeal by the leading intellectuals from the West intellectuals. They're already saying that fate of Europe depends very much on what's going in Ukraine, and therefore Ukraine deserves to be successful country, to be democratic country, because this is really the main defeat. Once Ukraine be democratic and stable country, Putin is defeated. But to do so, Ukrainian resources, Ukrainian efforts are not enough. We have to have strong support from the West. So what I'm saying, the circumstances, Ukraine deserves something like along the Marshallplan.
Yeah.
So they believe this is two things are the most important. It's the kind of open the perspective of integration and granting some kind of Marshallplan.
It's more like long-term, short-term, so to say. Short-term is no humanitarian aid, what you say, moral support, I suppose, like what we are trying to do now, so to say, keeping the Ukrainian voice heard in the Netherlands and everywhere in the world. And then, I mean, the voice from you, and not only, but also important from the president, whatever.
So let me say that, I'm sorry to tell that we in Ukraine, we believe more in Europe than probably you yourself.
Yes, that's I can understand.
We want to see a new Europe, not just with us, with Ukraine as well, but also kind of reconfigured, which could contribute to sustainability of this fragile peace.
And this is, I think, a very interesting and important point. But basically, that's what actually being there also is. Ukraine being there is not only being there for Russia, but also being there as a borderland country. So with these moving frontiers and so on in the last century, is also Ukraine is teaching us a lesson in that sense. To say,
So what we have to be aware that Russia and Putin and Kremlin has a huge problems in Russia itself. And Putin brought Russia to the stage when Russia has no good scenario for a future.
Yeah, and that's basically. I have some questions from our audience. So, what does Yaroslav think about the world's reaction on the wide-scale invasion so far? Can those be considered as appropriate? In my view, they are still rather in condemning mode. Would Russia find itself in hell economically on the short terms, as democratic leaders promised, presumably? So what do you think about the response to this moment?
I didn't quite follow the question, Ruud. Could you just
basically, it comes to that. You can see them in the chat if you like, but it basically comes to that. How do you appreciate the ideas of sanctions until now, the reaction of the West, of the European Union, of Biden, and so on?
So far, we haven't seen sufficient sanctions. because it's exactly what Putin counts on. That this will be sanctions like that. We don't have a real sanctions, to say. The sanctions will affect the Russian economy and Russian politics. So we very much appreciate this kind of help, this kind of sanctions, but they are not sufficient. If you want to fight Putin really, to affect, to strike the most his most vulnerable place, vulnerable sides, U.S. and European Union has to act much more resolutely in this kind of sanction.
And
I believe
you're thinking that it's like what we hear today is like cutting off Russia from the financial system and that kind of
SWIFT, yeah, SWIFT. But what we see now that Europe is divided along these lines. It's still divided. Mm-hmm. Because many countries, including Hungary, I believe Italy as well, they're against this kind of acts because they believe that they will have some economical losses. Mm-hmm. And they don't really understand. It's not about economical losses, but loss of the peace in Europe as well. As a matter of fact, mm-hmm. Price is very high.
Okay, and now the war is going on. Ask Christina asked it. Why not fast track Ukraine for the European Union and NATO? And so the risk threat is played. So
this is exactly what I'm saying, and thank you for the support. We have to put on the fast track.
Yeah, and that means part of becoming part of the European Union, being part of the NATO, because this is already played out, so to say.
So basically, what we have in examples of other post-communist countries from East, they started with the NATO, and that's helped them to enter into the European Union. We naively believed in Ukraine that we could deal without a NATO. Now we see it's not a possibility. We have to do both NATO and the European Union.
So just one question: what kind of way out should there be for Putin? So
there's no way out for Putin.
No.
There's no way out. Putin has no scenario for the future. No. Putin is stuck in the past. This everybody says.
No. So it's like win or lose.
Lose. He created a system, and he is also hostage of the system. He cannot leave.
So one of the what most worries me, Yaroslav, is that Putin won't win. And the blitz fails, to talk in your terms, but he will be there, and there will be a sustained war in Ukraine. And what worries me the most is that Ukraine could develop like a sort of Syria, so to say. And so the state
we don't know, but what many analysts say, including Russian analysts, that Putin has to pay even I'm not talking about geopolitical price or the wars, whatever, but economical price for the war with Ukraine. And the higher price he pays, the shorter he probably will stay in power, because it's okay. Let's take a worst case scenario. Putin occupies Ukraine or part of Ukraine. It's as Napoleon used to say, you could do with a knife everything, but you couldn't sit on it. What would you do with this occupied territory? Yeah. Putin has problem only with supporting Donbass, Ossetia, the kind of things. And now you have a huge country, which is very much resilient, so to say, which people are not accepting Russian scenario, the kind of things. So price is very high. Yeah. One way or another, Putin has to pay a very high price for the war with Ukraine. Yeah. And our scenario is to keep as long as we can, because every hour, every day, our resilience is increasing the price for Putin. But I'm saying again, we count very much that this is not just war, our war. It's also your war. It's a war of the West, of the free world. I'm sorry, it sounds pathetic, but it's true. Sometimes you should not be afraid of being pathetic because you said some very simple things. Now it's between Russia and the rest of the free world.
Good. That is maybe not a happy ending, so to say, Yaroslav, from our talk from this hour. So
no, Hegel used to say that history has rarely has a chapter with a happy ending. But the thing is that history never ends. Yeah. This is good news.
Good. I want to thank you very much for being here and for being our guest for this evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ruth, what you're doing. And thank you for your friends and colleagues who are there in our discussions. Thank you so much.
We will continue. And I think we had some technical problems, not with Zoom, but with the YouTube link. So still have to improve on this kind of stuff. But what I actually know that this, who wants to see this conversation again can do this on YouTube, and we will share it, so to say. We will meet again, definitely, and I hope that our guest for next week will be Bogdan Pankiewicz. We are working on that, our former Dutch honorary consul in Lviv, so to say, and also a good friend of mine. And we hope to see all of the audience again the next time. Thank you very much for being here. And if you have any question left, please ask us. There are some questions left in the chat, so to say. If you have any, want to get in touch with us, then please do. Maybe you have something as a last word to say, Yaroslav.
Keep calm and fight Putin.
Yeah, keep calm and fight Putin. Well, we will. Calm is a bit difficult in these days, so to say.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for everybody in the audience. And I hope to see you next time again. And all my thanks for being here. See you again.